Hello everybody, this is Kirby over yonder, and it's time to talk about my favorite animation studio, Pixar. For almost 25 years now, Pixar has been creating great films that people of all ages can enjoy and connect with. And while not every Pixar movie is perfect, all of them have at least some aspect to enjoy about them, even if that's just the animation. Every Pixar movie has its fans, so if you disagree with some of my lower entries, then please tell me your list in the comments. And I'm sorry if you like Cars 2. Also, here's a heads up that there will be spoilers for some of these movies, so if you haven't seen every Pixar movie, you might want to do that before watching this video. Number 21 is Cars 2. The only Pixar film besides Cars 3 that feels like it was made to sell toys, despite one of their franchises literally being about toys. The one thing I do like about Cars 2 is the fact that we do get a lot of unique and different settings. It's cool that the movie doesn't take place at just one place like the first one did. And that's about it, you got one thing right. Mater just ruins this movie. He is so annoying. He just steals the whole movie and completely embarrasses Lightning, and you're supposed to feel bad for him. And the message that Lightning needed to accept Mater for who he is and let him be himself makes no sense. It wasn't about the fact that Lightning needs to let Mater be himself. It's the fact that Mater is a bad friend. I also question the need to make this a spy film. The characters are cars. Cars aren't stealthy. This would make sense for an Incredibles sequel, but Cars? This movie is just a mess and the only Pixar film I consider to be really bad, and no, the visuals do not save it. At number 20, we have The Good Dinosaur. Here goes to Pixar's most boring film. There's nothing terrible about The Good Dinosaur, but I have a very hard time finding things I like about it. It's your typical buddy-buddy adventure, which would be fine if our two main characters were interesting in any way, but they're not. Spot is a child who can't speak, and Arlo is probably the most boring Pixar protagonist we've ever had. And because of that, I just can't buy the emotional moments between the two. One nice thing I will say is that the backgrounds are gorgeous. It's clear at this point that Pixar has mastered 3D animation. I mean, just look at some of these. Though even that has a negative side in that the character models stick out pretty badly in comparison. While something like Gumball is able to do a good job blending the cartoonish character models in with the realistic looking backgrounds, this Yoshi knockoff sticks out pretty badly. It's not a terrible movie, I'm sure kids won't dislike it, but there is far better from Pixar. At number 19, we have Monsters University. Honestly, my feelings towards this one are pretty similar to how I feel about The Good Dinosaur. I can at least have a little bit of fun with this one. There are a few okay jokes, and again, there's nothing in here that I really dislike. It's just that this movie is way too safe. It's a G-rated college movie, which means it's a college movie but without the actual stuff that people watch college movies for. I'm not saying I personally care for that stuff, but without it, it makes the movie feel very bare bones. And frankly, the concept itself just isn't very interesting. Do you want to watch Mike and Sully's college days? Sure, right after I watched the movie about Woody serving in the military. Actually, that sounds kinda awesome, I take it back. It's a fine movie, you might get a laugh or two, but it pales in comparison to the original movie. At number 18, we have Cars. It's funny, out of all of the earlier Pixar movies, Cars is the only one I find myself appreciating less over the years. But that being said, I don't think it's a bad movie by any means. I will say, this movie has great atmosphere, and I think Radiator Springs is a pretty cool location. And the movie is very pleasant. There's nothing here that's annoying like in Cars 2. The problem is that it's just not very interesting. Unlike some of Pixar's other films, it doesn't feel like there's much in here for older audiences to take away from. It's the first Pixar movie that feels like it's just for kids. which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when you compare it to movies later down on this list, the overall meh-ness of this movie really starts to show. It also doesn't help that the characters are very one-dimensional. Also, the world building in this movie is kinda terrible. How do all these buildings exist if everyone is a car? And like, are the insides of a car organs, or do they just look like regular cars? I don't know, maybe I'm thinking about it a little too hard. Cars is a fine movie, but Pixar has much better films. At number 17, we have Cars 3. Yeah, I know I'm not a very big fan of the Cars franchise, and yes, I know my virginity isn't going away anytime soon. But I did genuinely find things to like in Cars 3. It's a story about Lightning McQueen realizing that he's getting old and that he's being replaced by newer, younger racers. And generally, I like stories that have to do with characters aging, and I think this one's okay. I like Lightning's I say when I quit attitude, and how he has to come to terms with and accept modern technology. Though I feel like this movie could have done more to visually symbolize that. Maybe show bits of dirt or scratches on McQueen. He looks just as shiny as he did back in Cars 1 and 2, possibly more so. And while McQueen's story here is okay, I still don't really find him to be that interesting of a character, and it's hard for me to personally be invested in his story. I also wasn't really that big a fan of Lightning's mentor, Cruz Ramirez. Definitely not as bad as Mater in Cars 2, but I don't know, I wasn't that big a fan of her character. Speaking of Cars 2, this movie pretty much pretends that one didn't exist, which honestly I'm fine with, because I'm pretty sure we all did the same. This movie also sorta has a twist villain, but honestly, it is so predictable. I knew he was going to be a twist villain the moment he showed up on screen. But that being said, I think Cars 3 is alright. It's better than its predecessors because it does talk about some more adult themes, though it's still nothing to write home about. At number 16, we have Brave. Probably the one I have the least to say about, to be honest. Like with Cars, I do think that Brave does have good atmosphere. I love the way that the woods look. It looks like a movie I could just step right into. But that being said, the story is just okay, and I think Merida is a pretty meh protagonist. It's the Pixar movie that feels the least like a Pixar movie, which in a sense does give the film its own identity, but also it doesn't have the same qualities that most other Pixar movies have. In the end, I find myself at the same place I was with Monsters University, in that there's not much that I dislike, but there's not a whole lot that I really like that much either, though I put this one ahead of Monsters University because it does take more risks than that movie. All in all, this movie is just alright. At number 15, we have A Bug's Life. Like with Brave, I don't really have a whole lot to say about this one. The story is alright, Flick is a pretty okay protagonist. The circus bugs are definitely a highlight, but everything else is just okay. I know it's only their second movie, but when it comes right after a movie as good as Toy Story, it does feel a little underwhelming. But again, it's not bad, just okay. At number 14, we have Incredibles 2, the first movie on this list that I can say that I like, but don't necessarily love. There are definitely parts of this movie that I really like, but also some parts that were just kind of meh. I really liked everything that had to do with Elastigirl in this movie. There are some really good looking shots, and her story is very compelling. She's definitely a more interesting character in this movie than she is in the first movie. Getting to learn about Jack-Jack's powers is also pretty cool, and the action scenes look really good. But some of the side plots like Violet's boy problems and Dash's math homework were pretty meh to me. This movie also has a twist villain, and oh boy is it predictable. But overall, I had a pretty good time with Incredibles 2, though I wouldn't call it quite as incredible as the first one. At number 13, we have Up. I like Up. I think it's a good movie, but I wouldn't call it one of Pixar's best. I mean, that opening scene is absolutely one of the best scenes in all of Pixar. It's one of the most elegant love stories I've ever seen, and it's all told without dialogue. However, everything after that just kind of feels like a tonal whiplash. Which isn't to say it's bad. It's cute, it's fun, it's a nice adventure, and I like Carl and Russell. But it's nothing compared to those first 10 minutes. But there still are some good emotional moments, as well as it being a pretty funny movie too. It's one of Pixar's simpler movies, however it's still one that I enjoy quite a bit and don't mind rewatching at all. At number 12 we have WALLE. My feelings towards WALLE are pretty similar to my feelings towards Up. The first half of this movie is amazing. It's a beautifully told love story between two robots with very little dialogue and gorgeous visuals. It's easily one of the best things Pixar's ever done. The second half is alright, I don't hate it. I definitely get what they were going for with modern technology making us lazier. But much like with Up, it does feel like a tonal whiplash. I put it ahead of Up because the really good parts of WALL-E take up more of the movie than the really good parts of Up, but I still wish that more of the movie was like the first half. But with an amazing first half and a decent second half, I think WALL-E rounds out to be a pretty good Pixar film. At number 11, we have Toy Story 4. While it's my least favorite Toy Story film, I had a good time with Toy Story 4, though there was stuff in this movie that I didn't like, and I think I'll start with that. I really hate Woody's end decision in this movie to stay with Bo Peep and leave his friends behind. The point of Toy Story 3 was that Woody chose to stick by his friends no matter what, and this ending kinda spits in the face of that. Also, besides Woody, Buzz, and Bo Peep, most of the returning characters get very little screen time, which is definitely disappointing. In terms of the good things, this is one of the most beautiful looking movies I've ever seen. All of the textures just look gorgeous. Also, Woody has a very compelling character arc. It definitely feels like Woody's been through things and has changed a lot throughout the 4 movies. I also like the new characters. Forky is pretty fun, Duke Kaboom is amazing, Ducky and Bunny are pretty funny, and Gabby Gabby is actually a very good twist villain in the sense that she's actually a twist protagonist. Also, I really like what they did with Bo Peep in this movie. She's far more interesting than she was in Toy Story 1 and 2, and I really like her redesign. While I still don't think Toy Story 4 needed to exist, I did find a lot to like in it. At number 10, we have Ratatouille. This one gets overshadowed a lot, but it's still one that I enjoy quite a lot. It's definitely one of Pixar's most artistic films, and one that includes a lot of dark and adult elements. It also has really strong cinematography. I think the reason why it gets overshadowed a lot is because it's not as marketable as Toy Story or The Incredibles. I mean, it's about a rat learning to cook. I can guarantee you that nobody's gonna be buying a Remy action figure anytime soon. It's a shame though, because there really is a lot to like in this film. As for why it's so slow on the list, some scenes are a little slow, and I also don't have as strong of an emotional connection to this movie as I do with other Pixar movies, but I still think Ratatouille is a very good film. At number 9, we have The Incredibles. I know some people are going to be disappointed seeing it this low on the list, but I still really like The Incredibles. There's a lot to like in this movie. The superhero action is really good, the family dynamic is very strong, Syndrome is a fantastic villain. It's a very strong film, and I can definitely see why someone would call it their favorite Pixar movie. As for why I personally put it this low, well, it's kind of the same reason as Ratatouille. I don't really have as strong of an emotional connection to this movie as I do with some of the other Pixar's films. Also, in an age where we have a ton of superhero films, this one doesn't really stand out as much. And I'm not just talking about the MCU, also some animated films like Megamind, Lego Batman, and Into the Spider-Verse. But Incredibles is still a very solid movie, and one that I enjoy quite a lot. At number 8, we have Toy Story. For being Pixar's first ever movie, Toy Story is a very competent one. While the animation is definitely weird in places, particularly with the human designs, the movie still is very colorful and pleasant to look at. Woody and Buzz are both very interesting and likable characters. They also do a lot with the concept of being a toy, however still leave room for further exploration in future Toy Story films. It's also a pretty funny and quotable movie too. Overall, it may not be my favorite Toy Story film, but a very solid one to kick off one of Pixar's greatest franchises. At number 7, we have Monsters, Inc. Definitely one of the more nostalgic Pixar films to me, Monsters, Inc. is just a classic. Mike and Sully are both very likable and interesting characters and have a very fun character dynamic. The monster designs are really cool looking. I love the world building in this movie. The idea that monsters scare children as a business and use it to generate power is a really fun idea. Oh, and the climax with all of the different doors is one of the coolest and grandest climaxes in all of Pixar. And of course, the scene at the end is very touching and very emotional. It's funny, it's emotional, it's grand, and it's just a fantastic experience overall. At number 6, we have Finding Dory. Yes, it's this high on this list, and no, I'm not ashamed of myself. People complain about this movie being too similar to Finding Nemo, and while I do get what they're talking about there, you're also complaining about a movie reminding you of Finding Nemo. Oh no, how terrible of it. While I don't think it's as good as Finding Nemo, as evident by the fact that Finding Nemo hasn't been on this list yet, I also don't think it needs to be. In my opinion, a good sequel doesn't necessarily have to be better than the original, it just needs to develop upon the original in a good and interesting way. I love getting to learn more about Dory, how she was separated from her parents, how she ended up bumping into Marlin, how she actually learned how to speak whale. These are all very interesting developments, and just like in Finding Nemo, Ellen DeGeneres does a great job as Dory. I also really like Hank. I think he's a very likable and funny character. And I do think this movie is pretty dang funny, and the animation, of course, is just gorgeous. And the scene where Dory finally meets her parents is very touching. You can hate me all you want, I genuinely believe that Finding Dory is a fantastic sequel and a fantastic film. At number 5, we have Toy Story 2. Speaking of fantastic sequels, Toy Story 2 does a great job following up the original. I like how we actually get to learn about Woody and how he was actually a character in a TV show. Jessie is a great character, and the Prospector is a genuinely great twist villain with good motivations. Elle is also a pretty funny villain, as well as just being an utter babe. The climax with all the suitcases is really cool and grand, and so is the scene on the plane. And of course, Wheezy is a god amongst men. I mean, man, what a legend. And Buzz reacting to basically a carbon copy of himself from Toy Story 1 is pretty dang funny. Toy Story 2 is a fantastic movie, and beautifully leads into Toy Story 3. Speaking of which, at number 4 we have Toy Story 3. To me, Toy Story 3 is all about changing, and the acceptance of change. The toys have to accept the fact that Andy is growing up and that they aren't always going to be Andy's toys. There are so many things I love about this movie. This movie has amazing cinematography, making it easily the most grand-scale Toy Story movie we have. Lotso has got to be my absolute favorite Pixar villain. His backstory is incredible, and the twist is actually good. The incinerator scene is incredible. It actually convinces you that these toys might die, and seeing all of our favorite characters accept death is very mature for a kid's film. The lighting and the cinematography in this scene just makes it incredible, and the ending is extremely heart-tugging. Despite the fact that Toy Story 4 exists, I see this as the true ending to the Toy Story franchise. This movie absolutely does feel like a final film. It takes everything we loved about the first two movies and makes it even more grand and even more heart-tugging. One of the best sequels I've ever seen. At number 3, we have Inside Out. Genuinely one of the most creative and interesting ideas Pixar has ever had. Pixar's representation of the human mind is so creative and so well thought out, and the world building in this movie is fantastic. And the message that it's okay to cry and expressing negative emotions is actually very healthy is one of the most important messages Pixar's ever had. It's a genuinely funny movie as well, and the soundtrack is just beautiful to listen to. Also, the colors are just gorgeous to look at. The animation, the voice acting, the comedy, the creativity, the story, the emotion, everything about this movie is just wonderful, and proves that even today, Pixar can still make amazing films. Genuinely one of my favorites. At number 2, we have Coco. Speaking of movies that prove that Pixar can still make brilliant films today, Coco proves that Pixar can still make brilliant films even today. This is just a wonderful film. I talk about how beautiful the animation is, but honestly, I think this scene alone speaks for itself. I mean, just wow. Words cannot describe how gorgeous this looks. Easily the best looking shot in any Pixar film. But that's not all. I also really like getting to learn about some of the Mexican culture here. We get to learn about their music, their traditions, it's all really interesting. Hector is also a really funny, likable, and interesting sidekick. It's also a genuinely really funny film as well. The music is great too, some of these songs really get stuck in your head. And the ending is very emotional, and it actually got me to tear up a little bit the first time I watched it. Coco is just a lovely film. There was clearly a lot of heart and soul put into this movie, and it definitely shows. However, there is one Pixar film I like a little bit more. And that is Finding Nemo, my favorite Pixar film and just favorite film in general. There was no chance of any other film on this list beating Finding Nemo, not even Coco. Where do I start with this film? How about the animation? While Finding Dory is better on a technical level than Finding Nemo, this movie absolutely blew me away when I was a kid. Just the colors and how much life there is in the ocean, it just looks gorgeous, and I love films that take place underwater. Shark Tale came out a year after this one, and it looks like utter trash. The beginning of this movie is quite possibly the most tragic scene in all of Pixar. The fact that they're mature enough to actually discuss infanticide with kids is just beautiful. Marlin's journey here is really fun. We get to meet a lot of fun and likable characters along the way. And it's a simple story about father and son, and an argument that ended up separating them. And what I love most about the story is that neither character is in the wrong. It's just that they both have different outlooks on life, both of which are very understandable and need to come up with a compromise. Dory is also a really funny and likable character. I know I'm probably biased here, but Finding Nemo is just a wonderful film. To me at least, there was no other Pixar film that I could call my favorite. And that's the magic of Pixar. They're able to create great films that people of any age can connect with simple stories, likable characters, and beautiful animation. Did you agree with my list? Please let me know how you drink the Pixar films in the comments, and have a lovely day. Kirby, out.